When Donnie Yen calls a legendary action star a Hollywood fighter who never fought for real, he thinks he's just stirring up publicity drama. The cocky martial artist publicly challenges the aging movie legend to prove himself in a real fight, dismissing decades of cinema history with a smug smile. But what Yen doesn't realize is that this gray-haired warrior stepping into the ring is Steven Seagal, a man whose deadly Aikido skills were forged in classified military operations long before Hollywood ever discovered him. The younger fighter has no idea. He just insulted a special forces veteran who spent 50 years perfecting techniques that can kill with a single touch. While Yen shows off his flashy Wing Chun moves for the cameras, the martial arts master approaches with that signature deadly calm that once terrified enemies in Southeast Asian jungles. The arrogant challenger keeps taunting about fake movie fighting, but he's about to learn the difference between choreographed combat and authentic killing techniques. The crowd expects a quick victory for the younger, faster opponent, but they're actually witnessing the awakening of a warrior who's forgotten more about real combat than most people ever learn. What happens when Hollywood arrogance meets genuine battlefield experience? Will Yen survive discovering why some legends are built on actual bodies? What happened next would shatter the cocky fighter's world forever. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Beverly Hills Martial Arts Expo buzzed with the electric energy of cameras and celebrity worship. Designer spotlights carved through the afternoon haze as Donnie Yen, 61 and still moving like liquid lightning, held court at the media podium. His latest action film dominated the backdrop behind him, all chrome and explosions and promises of bone-crushing entertainment. "Mr. Yen," called out a reporter from Entertainment Weekly, "what's your take on the legendary martial artist who paved the way for today's action cinema?" Yen's smile carried just enough edge to make the question interesting. "I respect the pioneers, of course, but let's be honest about what we're really talking about here." The cameras leaned closer. This was the soundbite they'd come hunting for. Steven Seagal. Yen's voice carried across the expo floor like a challenge thrown down in an ancient dojo. A Hollywood fighter who never fought for real, just movie magic and stunt doubles. The silence stretched for exactly 3 heartbeats before every phone in the room started recording. Yen warmed to his theme, his Hong Kong accent sharpening each word into a blade. Real martial artists prove themselves in real combat. Some people just play pretend for cameras, you know? They get fat and old, living off old movies while real fighters keep pushing the art forward. Eddie Torino, Yen's silver-haired manager, watched from the wings with the satisfied expression of a man counting money that hadn't been printed yet. His manicured fingers drummed against his Armani jacket as social media exploded in real time. 3,000 miles away in Detroit, Marcus Freeman stood behind the counter of his modest gym, watching the live stream on a tablet propped between protein shake containers and worn boxing gloves. The man on screen, his friend for over 40 years, was being dismissed like yesterday's newspaper. Marcus reached for his phone as the expo dissolved into chaos, reporters scrambling over each other for follow-up quotes. The call went straight to voicemail, Steven's calm voice promising to return the call shortly. "Steven," Marcus said after the beep, his voice heavy with concern. "You need to see this, brother. That Wing Chun pretty boy just painted a target on your back." The live stream cut to commercial as Yen walked away, his entourage trailing behind like sharks following blood in the water. Dawn light filtered through the community center's windows, casting long shadows across the worn mats where Steven Seagal moved through his morning routine. At 73, his body still carried the fluid precision that had made him legendary, every step deliberate, every gesture containing decades of practiced power. Tommy Kowalski pushed through the center's front door, his worn sneakers silent on the polished floor. The 16-year-old had been coming here for 6 months, drawn by something he couldn't quite name but desperately needed. "Morning, Sensei," Tommy said, bowing with the respect his single mother had drilled into him from birth. Steven nodded, his gray ponytail shifting like silk across his shoulders. "Today we work on redirection, Tommy. Remember, we do not fight to win. We fight to resolve conflict." The next hour passed in comfortable silence, Steven guiding Tommy through basic Aikido forms while other students filtered in. Maria Santos, 14, and fierce as winter lightning. Deshaun Williams, 12 years old, and already carrying scars no child should bear. Ashley Chun, 15, and brilliant, using martial arts to channel anger into something useful. They were in the middle of a wrist escape technique when Marcus burst through the door, tablet in hand, and worry written across his weathered face. "Steven, we got a problem." Steven continued the demonstration, his voice never wavering. "Children, practice the movement we just learned. Feel how the energy flows, don't force it." Only after the students had spread across the mats did Steven approach his oldest friend. The video played in Marcus's trembling hands. Yen's words echoed through the small space like gunshots in a cathedral. Tommy glanced up from his practice, catching the tension between the two men. The other kids sensed it too. That electric moment when the adult world intrudes on the safety of childhood. Steven watched the entire clip without expression, his dark eyes never leaving the screen. When it finished, he was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the whisper of students practicing their forms. "Set up a meeting," Steven said finally, his voice carrying the same calm authority Tommy had learned to trust completely. "If Mr. Yen wants to test Hollywood versus reality, I accept." Marcus started to protest, but Steven held up one weathered hand. "Sometimes, old friend, we must face challenges not for our pride, but to teach others about respect." Tommy looked up from his practice, catching Steven's eye. The old master's expression was gentle but absolutely certain, like a mountain that had decided to move. That Marcus's gym occupied a forgotten corner of downtown Detroit, squeezed between a pawn shop and a barber shop that had been cutting hair since the Eisenhower administration. The walls were covered with photographs, Marcus and Steven on movie sets, performing stunts that would make modern insurance companies weep, their faces young and hungry for adventure. The phone call started immediately. Marcus worked his way through a contact list that read like a who's who of Hollywood's golden age of action. Stunt coordinators who remembered when men settled differences with handshakes instead of lawyers. Fight promoters who understood that some battles were about more than money. "Danny, it's Marcus Freeman." "Yeah, the Detroit gym." "Listen, I need a favor." Steven sat in the corner, moving through meditation forms that looked deceptively simple. His breathing never changed, even as Marcus painted the logistics of arranging what the media was already calling the challenge of the century. The photographs seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light, memories made solid. Steven in 1987, between takes of Above the Law, working through authentic Aikido techniques with visiting Japanese masters who nodded approval at his form. The real training that Hollywood never saw. But there were other memories, darker ones that lived in classified files and the nightmares of old soldiers. Steven in Jungle Fatigues, 1975, moving through a hostile village with deadly precision. The mission that went wrong. The hostages they couldn't save. The brother that Eddie Torino would never stop mourning. Betty Rodriguez's call interrupted Marcus's negotiations with a venue manager in downtown Detroit. "Mr. Freeman? This is Betty Rodriguez from Channel 7. I understand Mr. Seagal has accepted Donnie Yen's challenge." Marcus glanced at Steven, who nodded once. "Ms. Rodriguez, my friend believes in demonstrating the principles of true martial arts. This will be a private exhibition, legitimate martial artists only as witnesses. Could I possibly speak with Mr. Seagal directly?" Steven took the phone with hands that had signed autographs for presidents and broken bones of men who thought they were untouchable. "Ms. Rodriguez." His voice carried the weight of decades. "Some lessons can only be taught through action. Mr. Yen will have his demonstration." After he hung up, Marcus resumed his worried pacing. "Steven, you sure about this? That kid's got speed, and he's been training his whole life." Steven opened his eyes, and for just a moment Marcus saw the warrior who had survived missions that officially never happened. "Marcus, some lessons can only be taught through action." The photographs watched from their frames, silent witnesses to a friendship that had survived Hollywood, heartbreak, and the passage of time itself. Eddie Torino's Beverly Hills office was a shrine to manufactured dreams, movie posters, celebrity photographs, and awards that glittered like fool's gold under designer lighting. He moved between 3 phone calls simultaneously, his silver hair perfect, his Armani suit worth more than most people's cars. "Streaming rights for the Seagal exhibition? Gentlemen, We're talking about the story of the century. The numbers dance through his head like sugar plums. Pay-per-view revenue, international distribution, merchandising opportunities that would make a carnival barker weep with envy. His assistant, Janet Phillips, stood in the doorway with the expression of someone watching a train wreck in slow motion. 28 years old, fresh from journalism school, still naive enough to believe in things like ethics and truth. Mr. Torino, don't you think we should tell both fighters about the streaming arrangement? Mr. Seagal specifically requested. A private exhibition. Torino covered the phone's mouthpiece with a manicured hand. Janet, darling, this is business. Sometimes we protect people from their own modesty. The manipulation was surgical in its precision. He fed Yen's ego with promises of Hollywood validation, painted Steven as a relic desperate for relevance. To the streaming platforms, he sold authenticity, two legends settling their differences with honor and tradition. But the real profit lay in the narrative he was constructing. The aging action star's inevitable humiliation would generate more clicks than 1,000 celebrity scandals. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Steven sat in the Detroit Community Center, reading the contract that would change everything. The appearance fee was substantial, enough to fund the youth program for 2 years, maybe 3 if they were careful. Marcus paced behind him, muttering about bad feelings and worse intentions. Something's not right about this, Steven. This Torino character, he's got that Hollywood slick thing going. Reminds me of the producers who tried to screw us back in the day. Steven's pen hovered over the signature line. The children needed the program. Maria Santos needed a safe place to channel her anger. Tommy Kowalski needed a father figure who wouldn't disappear when things got difficult. Ashley Chin needed to believe that intelligence and discipline could overcome any obstacle. Sometimes, Marcus, we must walk into the storm to reach the calm. The signature flowed across the paper like calligraphy, each letter carrying the weight of decades. In Beverly Hills, Torino smiled as his phone buzzed with confirmation. The pieces were falling into place with the precision of a Swiss watch. Janet Phillips watched her boss pour champagne that cost more than her monthly salary, celebrating a victory that hadn't happened yet. She pulled out her own phone, fingers hovering over a number she wasn't sure she should call. The storm was gathering, and everyone could feel it coming. Dawn broke over Detroit like a prayer answered in steel and concrete. Behind the community center, Steven's private training space waited in perfect silence. Wooden floors worn smooth by decades of practice, a heavy bag that had absorbed 10,000 strikes, weapons racks holding instruments of an older, more honest kind of violence. Steven moved through his morning forms with the fluid precision of water finding its level. His body, despite 73 years of use, bent and flowed like bamboo in wind. Each technique carried the weight of authentic mastery, movements that had saved his life when movies were just a distant dream. Tommy arrived as the sun cleared the horizon, eager energy barely contained in his 16-year-old frame. The boy had been Steven's most dedicated student, drawn by something deeper than technique, the promise that strength could be used to protect rather than dominate. Today we work on multiple attackers, Steven said, his voice carrying the calm authority of absolute certainty. Remember, Tommy, we do not fight to win. We fight to resolve conflict. The lesson unfolded like a meditation in motion. Steven demonstrated how to use an aggressor's momentum against him, how to find stillness in chaos, how to end violence without becoming violent yourself. Tommy absorbed each principle with the hunger of youth discovering truth. Betty Rodriguez arrived mid-morning, her press credentials and skeptical expression announcing her intentions. She had come expecting to document an aging actor's desperate grab for relevance. Instead, she found something that made her question everything she thought she knew about Hollywood legends. Mr. Seagal, how do you respond to critics who say you're too old for this kind of exhibition? Steven continued his demonstration, redirecting an imaginary attacker with movements that belonged in a museum of lethal art. Age brings wisdom, MS. Rodriguez. Wisdom teaches us that true strength comes not from proving ourselves to strangers, but from protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The afternoon class brought Steven's regular students, children from neighborhoods where hope was rationed like medicine. They practiced with the intensity of young people who understood that these lessons might someday save their lives. Evening. Settled over Detroit, Steven sat in meditation while Betty watched from the doorway. She had come hunting for a story about a has-been actor. Instead, she was witnessing something far more dangerous, the awakening of a warrior who had never really slept. Detroit Metropolitan Airport shuddered under the weight of money and arrogance as Donnie Yen's private jet kissed the runway. The Gulfstream G650 was white as fresh snow, its interior appointed with the kind of luxury that whispered rather than shouted its expense. Yen emerged like a conquering emperor, his entourage trailing behind him in formation. Eddie Torino led the procession, his silver hair perfect in the Michigan wind, flanked by bodyguards who looked like they'd been ordered from a catalog of expensive intimidation. The convoy rolled through Detroit's streets like an invasion force. Black SUVs with tinted windows carrying cargo more valuable than gold. The ego of a man who had never learned the difference between confidence and arrogance. "Look at this place," Yen muttered from the leather cocoon of his vehicle, watching urban decay roll past like frames from a documentary about American failure. How did Seagal end up in this wasteland? Torino smiled with the satisfaction of a predator who had found perfect hunting grounds. Sometimes legends fall farther than ordinary men, Donnie. Makes the impact more satisfying when they finally hit bottom. The penthouse suite at Detroit's most expensive hotel became command central for what Torino privately called Operation Dignity Kill. Hidden cameras were positioned, streaming equipment tested, social media campaigns launched with military precision. Meanwhile, in Steven's neighborhood, the storm clouds were gathering in human form. Yen's bodyguards, bored and contemptuous, decided to entertain themselves at a corner store. Robert "Tank" Jackson, a 67-year-old Vietnam veteran, with hands like broken concrete, happened to be in their way. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Tank hit the pavement hard, his purple heart metal skittering across dirty asphalt, while the bodyguards laughed like hyenas, finding fresh carrion point. 20 minutes later, Tank limped into the community center, his pride more damaged than his body. "Steven," he said, his voice carrying 40 years of friendship and trust. "We got a problem." Steven listened to the story without expression, his dark eyes never leaving Tank's face. When the old soldier finished, Steven placed a gentle hand on his friend's shoulder. "Anger clouds judgment, Tank. We will let Mr. Yen reveal his true character." But Steven's students saw something different in their teacher's stillness. The terrible calm that comes before lightning splits the sky. The neighborhood was choosing sides, and everyone could feel the electricity building in the air like the promise of thunder. The warehouse had been transformed into a cathedral of combat. Mats spread across concrete floors like an altar prepared for sacrifice. 50 folding chairs held witnesses who understood they were about to see something that would live in memory long after the bruises faded. Steven entered through the side door, moving with the unhurried pace of a man who had never needed to prove his courage to strangers. His black GI was simple, traditional, unmarked by sponsors or logos. The uniform of a warrior who served principles larger than profit. Donnie Yen arrived like a rock star. His designer fight were catching the overhead lights, his entourage spreading across the space like an occupying army. The contrast was deliberate and devastating. Youth versus age, flash versus substance, performance versus authenticity. Betty Rodriguez positioned her news crew discreetly, unaware that Torino's hidden cameras were recording from angles that would turn private combat into public spectacle. The referee, a respected Detroit martial arts instructor, called both men to center. Steven bowed with the deep respect his teachers had demanded 50 years ago. Yen responded with a dismissive nod that announced his intentions more clearly than words. "Gentlemen, this is an exhibition of martial arts, not a street fight. Honor your arts and each other." The opening exchange revealed everything. Yen exploded forward with Wing Chun's signature chain punches, his fists blurring like hummingbird wings. Fast, technical, spectacular, and completely ineffective. Steven moved like water around stones, redirecting each attack with Aikido's fundamental principle that force applied against force creates only resistance. Where Yen struck, Steven wasn't. Where Yen expected resistance, Steven offered only emptiness. The first throw came so naturally it seemed choreographed. Yen's forward momentum became his downfall as Steven's hip gently guided the younger man to the mat with textbook precision. The crowd murmured appreciation. This was martial arts as meditation, violence transformed into something approaching ballet. Yen rose with his pride more damaged than his body. The second exchange followed the same pattern. Aggressive attack met with effortless defense. Youth's fury absorbed and redirected by experience's wisdom. By the third exchange, frustration had replaced strategy in Yen's approach. His techniques became wilder, more desperate, less effective. Steven remained centered, calm, inevitable as gravity. The witnesses began to understand they were seeing mastery in its purest form, not the flash and thunder of Hollywood combat, but the quiet authority of authentic skill. Desperation transformed Donnie Yen from martial artist into street fighter as his carefully constructed image crumbled under Steven's relentless technique. The Wing Chun forms his teachers had drilled into him since childhood abandoned him like fair-weather friends, leaving only the bitter taste of public humiliation. Steven continued his methodical dismantling, each counterattack a lesson in the difference between knowing techniques and understanding principles. Pressure points that temporarily numbed Yen's left arm. Joint locks that controlled without causing permanent damage. The surgical precision of a man who had learned his craft. When mistakes meant death, Marcus watched from ringside, pride and worry warring in his weathered face. 40 years of friendship had taught him to read Steven's moods like weather patterns, and something dangerous was building behind those calm, dark eyes. Yen abandoned all pretense of martial arts, launching eye gouges and groin strikes that belonged in back alleys rather than training halls. Steven deflected each attack with movements that seemed to exist outside normal time, his responses arriving before Yen's attacks had fully formed. The crowd's appreciation turned to unease. This was no longer an exhibition. It was an execution in slow motion. Torino signaled his hidden operator from the back of the warehouse, his manicured fingers cutting through air like a conductor directing his orchestra toward crescendo. Steven began his finishing combination, a flowing sequence of Aikido techniques designed to end the confrontation with Yen's dignity intact. The joint lock was forming, submission inevitable, when darkness swallowed the warehouse like a hungry mouth. Emergency lighting flickered on 30 seconds later, revealing a scene that made no sense to anyone who had been watching. Steven lay, unconscious on the mat, Yen standing over him with the expression of a man who had witnessed his own miracle. The crowd erupted in confusion. Marcus rushed to Steven's side, finding his friend unconscious but unmarked, breathing steady, but his eyes showing the telltale signs of chemical intervention. Yen was declared the winner by technical knockout, though his celebration felt hollow. Even to himself. He had entered the warehouse hunting validation and found only questions that would haunt his sleep for months to come. Betty Rodriguez noticed Torino pocketing Steven's water bottle, a detail that would later prove more significant than anyone imagined. As Steven was helped to his feet, confusion clouding his usually sharp gaze, Yen delivered his victory speech to cameras that had somehow materialized in the darkness. This is what happens when Hollywood fake meets real martial artist. But even as he spoke the words, doubt was already growing like cancer in his chest. Steven's apartment above the community center felt smaller in defeat, the walls pressing close like the weight of unanswered questions. He sat on the edge of his narrow bed, head cradled in weathered hands, trying to piece together fragments of memory that scattered like leaves in wind. Marcus moved through the small kitchen with the careful precision of a man defusing a bomb, brewing coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Tommy had claimed the threadbare couch, his 16-year-old loyalty refusing to abandon ship even when the captain couldn't remember how he'd lost the war. "I remember the joint lock," Steven said, his voice carrying none of its usual certainty. "I had him. The technique was perfect, the positioning flawless. Then nothing." The morning news played on repeat, each broadcast driving the humiliation deeper. Commentators dissected Steven's collapse with the surgical precision of vultures picking clean bones. Social media exploded with memes and mockery, 40 years of legendary status evaporating like morning dew. Steven's students arrived throughout the morning, their faces carrying the particular confusion of children watching their hero bleed. Maria Santos asked the question they were all thinking. "Sensei, did you really lose?" The honest answer cut deeper than any lie would have. "I don't remember, child." Dr. Patricia Williams arrived at noon, her medical bag and concerned expression announcing intentions Stephen couldn't bring himself to resist. The examination was thorough, professional, and ultimately mystifying. "Stephen, there's no sign of head trauma, no swelling, no concussion indicators. Your pupils are reactive, your reflexes normal. Whatever happened to you wasn't caused by physical impact." She pulled Marcus aside while Stephen dressed, her voice dropping to the whisper doctors used when delivering verdicts nobody wanted to hear. "Marcus, his symptoms are consistent with chemical sedation, something fast-acting that causes retrograde amnesia. This wasn't a knockout, this was drugging." The neighborhood felt different now, like a guitar with loosened strings. Local gang members tested boundaries that Stephen's presence had previously made inviolate. Respect, once freely given, now carried the bitter aftertaste of doubt. That evening, Stephen taught his regular class to half-empty mats. Those who came seemed distracted, uncertain, their faith shaken by mysteries they couldn't solve. After the last student left, Stephen sat alone in meditation, seeking answers in the silence that had always been his most reliable teacher. Betty Rodriguez knocked on the community center's door at precisely 9 p.m., her laptop and manila folder announcing that someone's world was about to change forever. Stephen emerged from his meditation like a man surfacing from deep water, his expression shifting as he registered the determination burning in her eyes. Marcus appeared from the back room, coffee mug in hand, wariness written across his weathered features like a warning sign. "Ms. Rodriguez," Stephen said, gesturing her toward the folding table that served as his office desk. "You look like someone who's found something that shouldn't have been lost." Betty's fingers trembled slightly as she opened her laptop, the screen's glow painting harsh shadows across faces that were about to learn how deep the rabbit hole actually went. "Mr. Seagal, I've been investigating Eddie Torino since your fight ended. What I found." She pulled up financial records that looked like modern hieroglyphics to anyone who hadn't spent years following money trails through corporate shell games. "These are bank transfers, Mr. Seagal. During your exhibition match, several young people disappeared from this neighborhood and 3 others across Detroit." The photographs hit the table like physical blows. Carlos Mendez, 17 years old, last seen walking home from basketball practice. Lisa Washington, 16, vanished from a bus stop 3 blocks from her high school. Kevin O'Brien, 15, disappeared between his part-time job and family dinner. Stephen's expression never changed, but something shifted behind his dark eyes, the stillness that comes before avalanches. "Surveillance footage from the warehouse district," Betty continued, her voice gaining strength as she laid out the evidence like cards in a rigged game. "Unmarked vans, professional operation, coordinated timing. They used your fight as a distraction." Marcus set down his coffee with hands that had started shaking. "You're saying they took kids while everyone was watching Stephen get drugged," Betty finished. "Torino's operation has been using martial arts events as cover for human trafficking across 5 states. Your reputation as a community protector made you a target, Mr. Seagal. They had to discredit you before they could operate freely in your territory." Stephen stood slowly, walking to his weapons rack with movements that belonged to a different century. His hand closed around the handle of a traditional tanto, the blade singing softly as it cleared the scabbard. "Marcus," his voice carried the weight of absolute decision. "Call our old contacts. Betty, keep investigating." The warrior had awakened, and someone was going to pay. 4 a.m. found Stephen moving through aggressive Aikido kata in his private training space, each technique incorporating the lethal variations he'd learned when wars were fought in shadows and victory meant coming home alive. The meditation had worked, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with mechanical precision. The drugging had been surgical in its application, fast-acting sedative with retrograde amnesia properties, administered during the chaos of combat when adrenaline would mask the initial effects. Professional work, the kind that left no traces except in the memories that wouldn't form. Marcus arrived with a tablet full of security footage and the grim expression of a man who'd seen too much history repeat itself. The traffic camera across from the warehouse had captured everything. Torino's assistant Janet approaching Steven's water station during the third exchange, her movements quick and practiced. "There's your smoking gun," Marcus said, his voice carrying 40 years of accumulated anger. That pretty boy was never supposed to win on skill. Steven's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Colonel James Mitchell, his former commanding officer and the kind of man who understood that some battles couldn't be won through proper channels. Mitchell's intelligence painted a picture that made Steven's blood run cold. Torino's network stretched across 12 states, using entertainment venues as hunting grounds and shipping children like cargo to buyers who paid premium prices for American innocence. The operation was bigger than Detroit, older than Steven's involvement, and more sophisticated than anything local law enforcement was equipped to handle. 3 other martial arts events in different cities had preceded similar disappearances, a pattern that transformed tragedy into system. Dr. Williams confirmed through blood analysis what Steven's instincts had already told him. Gamma-hydroxybutyric acid in trace amounts, metabolized quickly but leaving signature markers for those who knew how to look. "Steven, this was administered by someone with medical training. The dosage was calculated to your body weight, designed to incapacitate without killing. Professional work." Steven suited up in black tactical clothing that had gathered dust for 20 years, checking equipment, with movements that belonged to muscle memory deeper than conscious thought. The reconnaissance would be surgical, invisible, definitive. Marcus grabbed his arm as Steven headed for the door. "This requires different skills than we used in Hollywood, old friend," Steven said, his voice carrying echoes of missions that officially never happened. "If I'm not back by dawn, call Colonel Mitchell." The Detroit night swallowed him like he'd never existed, leaving only the promise of justice delivered by hands that had never forgotten how to kill. The industrial district of Detroit slept fitfully under sodium vapor lights that painted everything the color of dried blood. Steven moved through shadows that seemed designed for his particular brand of warfare, each step planned 3 moves ahead, every breath calculated to leave no trace. The warehouse squatted between abandoned factories like a spider in the center of its web. 6 armed guards patrolled the perimeter with the lazy confidence of men who believed their employer's money made them untouchable. They were about to learn the difference between carrying weapons and knowing how to use them. Steven's first target never saw him coming. The guard rounded the building's northeast corner and found only empty air where his consciousness used to be. Steven's pressure point technique dropping him into dreamless sleep with surgical precision. 5 seconds, no sound, no struggle. The second guard discovered his partner's absence 40 seconds too late, his radio call cut short by a joint lock that induced unconsciousness through oxygen deprivation. Steven caught the falling body, lowering it gently to concrete that had absorbed decades of Detroit's industrial ambitions. 4 guards became 3, became 2, became none, each elimination a masterclass in violence applied with mathematical precision. Steven moved through their defensive positions like smoke through a screen door, unstoppable because he was essentially invisible. The warehouse interior revealed the scope of Torino's operation, holding cells constructed from shipping containers, forged documents scattered across workbenches, transportation schedules that read like train timetables to hell. Steven photographed everything with military efficiency, his camera flash capturing evidence that would destroy lives measured in legislative terms. Personal belongings confirmed his worst fears. Carlos Mendez's basketball jersey, Lisa Washington's student ID, Kevin O'Brien's work uniform, trophies from hunts that had ended in captivity. The children had been here, but the cells stood empty now, their cargo already shipped to destinations that made Steven's special forces training feel inadequate. Computer files revealed the true scope of the operation. 200 missing children. Across 5 states, buyers from 6 countries, profit margins that made drug trafficking look like selling lemonade. Steven's camera captured it all, building a case that would require federal intervention. The silent alarm triggered during his exit, flooding the facility with backup security as Steven disappeared into Detroit's industrial maze. From a distant rooftop, he watched the evacuation begin. Trucks loaded with evidence, computers wiped, witnesses relocated. His phone call to Marcus carried the weight of absolute certainty. "They know we're coming. We need to move faster." The hunt had begun in earnest, and someone was going to pay in blood. Tommy burst through the community center's front door like a bullet fired from panic, his sneakers skidding on polished floors as he fought for breath. Steven and Marcus looked up from their conference with Betty, intelligence photographs scattered across the folding table like pieces of a nightmare puzzle. They got Maria and Ashley. Tommy gasped, his 16-year-old voice cracking under the weight of terror. Black SUVs outside Jefferson High. Grabbed them right off the sidewalk. Steven's phone rang before the words finished leaving Tommy's mouth. The voice that answered his greeting had been electronically disguised, stripped of humanity, and left with only mechanical menace. You should have stayed retired, old man. Hollywood legends don't age well in the real world. The caller's knowledge was surgical in its precision. Katie Kowalski's schedule, Tommy's mother's work shifts, the exact route Maria Santos took home from school. Information that could only come from professional surveillance and the kind of money that bought silence from the right people. We have 3 of your little birds now, Seagal. Keep playing detective and we'll collect the whole flock. Detroit's full of children who won't be missed until it's too late. The line went dead, leaving silence that tasted like copper and defeat. Betty's news contacts confirmed the pattern. Similar disappearances in cities where Torino had conducted events. Local police departments that seemed mysteriously disinterested in missing children from poor neighborhoods. The corruption ran deeper than street-level payoffs, extending into institutions that were supposed to protect the innocent. Steven walked to his weapons rack, his movements carrying the deliberate calm that preceded terrible violence. The Tonto felt familiar in his grip, its weight balanced by decades of practice and purpose. Marcus started to argue for federal intervention, for proper channels and legal procedures that would take weeks to navigate while children suffered in captivity. They don't have weeks, Marcus. They don't have days. Steven's voice carried echoes of classified missions where success was measured in lives saved rather than procedures followed. Dr. Williams treated Steven's minor injuries from the warehouse infiltration while he planned his next move, her medical training warring with her civilian conscience as she watched her friend prepare for war. These children are my responsibility, Steven told his reflection in the darkened window. That makes this personal. The storm was about to break, and someone was going to drown. The abandoned auto plant squatted on Detroit's outskirts like a monument to American industrial decline, its broken windows reflecting sunset light across acres of rusted dreams. Steven approached the rendezvous point with movements that belonged to a different war, each step calculated for maximum tactical advantage. Colonel James Mitchell emerged from the shadows carrying 64 years of military service and the kind of equipment that didn't appear on civilian procurement lists. Flanking him were Sergeant Major Rosa Martinez and Chief Petty Officer William Dutch Sullivan, veterans whose combined combat experience could fill textbooks nobody was cleared to read. Steven, Mitchell's voice carried the weight of shared history and classified sorrows. Situation brief says we're looking at professional trafficking operation with federal law enforcement corruption. Rules of engagement. Rescue the children. Everything else is secondary. Steven's response eliminated moral ambiguity with surgical precision. The target was Torino's main operations center, a converted freight facility that intelligence suggested held the missing teenagers along with evidence that could destroy the entire network. Military-grade surveillance revealed professional security, not street-level muscle. Mitchell's team moved with the coordinated precision of men who had spent decades turning violence into science. Steven led the assault, combining Aikido principles with lethal military applications, his movements flowing like water around obstacles that tried to stop tsunamis. The security chief fell to a combination of traditional joint locks and modern tactical awareness, his expensive training no match for authentic combat experience. Steven's technique had evolved beyond what Hollywood ever captured. Traditional martial arts enhanced by knowledge gained when mistakes meant death. 4 teenagers were rescued from the first building, their relief transforming into confusion as they realized their salvation had come from a man they recognized from movies their parents watched. Steven guided them to safety while his team gathered intelligence that painted an even darker picture. The main operation had relocated to a secondary facility, taking the Detroit children with them. Computer files revealed transportation schedules, buyer contacts, profit margins that reduced human lives to commodity pricing. Police sirens approached as Steven's team extracted with their rescued cargo and captured intelligence. The primary targets had escaped, but the network was bleeding information like a severed artery. Steven studied surveillance photographs while paramedics treated the rescued teenagers, his expression carrying the focused intensity that preceded. Final battles. Tomorrow night, they move everyone out of state, he told his team. We have one chance. Mitchell's suburban home had been transformed into a tactical operations center, its family room now housing communication equipment that could coordinate military operations across multiple time zones. The rescued teenagers slept in guest bedrooms while adults planned what everyone understood would be the final confrontation. Intelligence painted a picture that made Steven's military background feel inadequate. Over 200 missing children. Across 5 states, buyers from 6 countries, a criminal network that treated human trafficking like any other import-export business. The scope was staggering, the profit margins obscene, the logistics sophisticated enough to impress Fortune 500 executives. Donnie Yen's arrival interrupted the planning session like a thunderclap in clear sky. The martial arts star stood in Mitchell's doorway carrying genuine remorse and information that could change everything. I know what Torino did to you, Yen said, his earlier arrogance replaced by something approaching humility. The drugging, the setup, all of it. He promised me Hollywood roles in exchange for discrediting you publicly. The tension between Steven and Yen could have cut glass. 40 years of reputation balanced against desperate children who needed rescue more than adults needed satisfaction. Steven's response carried the measured calm that had made him legendary. What's done is done, Mr. Yen. What matters now are the children. Yen's additional intelligence revealed the trafficking operation's final phase, a shipping facility where children were prepared for overseas transport. Their identities erased and futures sold to buyers who paid premium prices for American innocence. The facility was larger than anything they had encountered, more heavily defended, and operating on a timeline that eliminated second chances. Steven and Yen trained together briefly, combining Aikido principles with Wing Chun applications, their different styles creating tactical possibilities neither could achieve alone. Betty coordinated with legitimate federal authorities who were finally taking action based on Steven's evidence. The FBI task force would provide backup, but the children's safety depended on precision execution rather than overwhelming force. Tommy insisted on participating in the rescue mission, his sisters' captivity overriding adult concerns about teenage involvement in military operations. Steven studied the boy's face and saw his own determination reflected in 16-year-old features. Stay close, stay quiet, and do exactly what I say, Steven told him. The final battle was approaching, and everyone could feel it in the air like electricity before lightning. The shipping facility sprawled across 10 acres of industrial wasteland, its perimeter defended by floodlights, razor wire, and men who carried military weapons with civilian consciences. Steven's team approached in 2 vehicles, Mitchell's converted surveillance van and a pickup truck that had seen better decades. Initial reconnaissance revealed the operation in final stages. Children were being loaded into modified shipping containers, their futures reduced to cargo manifests and bills of lading. Time had become their enemy. Measured in minutes rather than hours, the Steven's assault team began their approach. But something felt wrong. Too easy, too predictable. Like walking into a trap designed by someone who understood their capabilities better than they understood their enemy's preparation. The ambush was surgical in its execution. Corrupt law enforcement officers emerged from concealment positions, their badges providing legal cover for criminal actions. Steven's military team found themselves outgunned and surrounded, their tactical advantage negated by enemies who carried government authority. Torino appeared from the facility's command center, his silver hair perfect despite the evening's violence. His revelation hit Steven like physical impact, the connection that explained 50 years of careful planning and patient revenge. You remember Laos, 1975? The rescue mission that went sideways? My younger brother was among the hostages you failed to save, Steven. I've been waiting half a century for this moment. The classified mission had been Steven's first taste of failure, the operation that taught him warfare's cruelest lesson. Sometimes heroes can't save everyone. Torino's brother had been 19 years old, a CIA contractor captured while gathering intelligence on North Vietnamese supply routes. Yen was captured while attempting to reach the children through the facility's upper levels, his acrobatic skills no match for professional security. Tommy broke from Steven's protection when he saw his sister being loaded into a container, young love overriding tactical discipline. Steven faced the ultimate warrior's choice: surrender and save lives, or fight and watch innocents die for his pride. His weapons hit the concrete with the finality of surrendered dreams. As zip ties bit into his wrists, Torino smiled with satisfaction that had been building for 5 decades. Tomorrow night, you and your new friend die on livestream. The world will watch the great Steven Seagal fail one last time. The shipping container door slammed shut like the sound of fate being sealed. The shipping container had been modified for human cargo, its steel walls lined with restraint points and ventilation that kept prisoners alive without granting dignity. Steven, Yen, Tommy, and 12 other kidnapped children existed in a space designed to break spirits before bodies ever reached their destinations. Chains bound their wrists, but not their determination. Steven worked his fingers along the metal restraints, feeling for weaknesses while his eyes adapted to the container's dim lighting. Beside him, Yen tested his own bonds with movements that belonged more to contortionist than martial artist. In Aikido, we learned that every force creates an opportunity, Steven whispered, his voice carrying decades of teaching experience. These chains are not our enemy, they are our tools. The lesson began with breathing techniques that slowed heart rates and sharpened focus. Steven guided Yen through joint flexibility exercises that turned handcuffs into puzzles rather than prisons. Traditional Aikido wrist escapes, refined through 50 years of practice, became survival skills rather than demonstration techniques. Yen shared his own knowledge in return, acrobatic principles that allowed impossible flexibility, pressure point applications that could unlock restraints through precise application of force. Their rivalry dissolved into partnership as survival demanded cooperation. Tommy organized the younger children with natural leadership that reminded Steven why he'd chosen teaching over continued military service. The boy's sister Katie, 12 years old and terrified but unbroken, helped coordinate whispered communications between prisoners. "When we move, you get your sister and the other small ones to safety first," Steven told Tommy. "Yen and I will handle the guards." The container's routine became their battlefield intelligence. Guards checked prisoners every 15 minutes, always 2 men, occasionally 3 during shift changes. The lock mechanism was electronic but backed up with traditional deadbolts that required keys. Steven used meditation techniques to maintain focus while developing their escape plan. His breathing never changed, his heart rate never spiked, his mind working through possibilities with computer-like precision. "The shift change happens at midnight," he whispered to Yen. 3 guards. Instead of 2, but they're tired and careless. That's our window." Yen nodded understanding, his earlier arrogance replaced by respect for authentic tactical thinking. The sound of approaching footsteps announced their opportunity was arriving like clockwork. Midnight brought the guard change. Like a gift wrapped in routine. 3 sets of footsteps approached the container, 2 tired men ending their shift, 1 fresh guard beginning his watch. The perfect moment when attention was divided and protocols relaxed. The container door opened to reveal guards who expected defeated prisoners but found prepared warriors instead. Steven's first target never completed his prisoner count, a pressure point strike rendering him unconscious before his brain could register the attack. 2 seconds, no sound, perfect execution. Yen demonstrated that screen fighting could translate to real combat when applied with deadly intent. His acrobatic movement confused the second guard long enough for traditional Wing Chun to disable rather than entertain. Chain punches targeted nerve clusters instead of dramatic effect, ending the confrontation with surgical precision. The third guard reached for his radio, but found only empty air as Steven's joint lock induced unconsciousness through controlled strangulation. The man's weapon changed ownership without a struggle, its weight familiar in hands that remembered military service. 12 children followed Tommy's leadership through the facility's maze of shipping containers and industrial equipment. Their movement was coordinated through hand signals and whispered commands. Young people proving that courage wasn't limited by age when properly directed. Steven fought through the shipping yard with movements that belonged in a museum of lethal arts. Each technique served multiple purposes: elimination of threats, protection of innocents, advancement toward their escape route. His military training enhanced rather than replaced martial arts principles, creating combinations that were both beautiful and devastating. That Yen's contribution proved that authentic skill could overcome flashy technique when lives depended on results. His speed became an asset rather than showmanship, his flexibility allowing impossible angles of attack that professional security couldn't anticipate or counter. The facility's communication center became their primary target, its destruction, ensuring that reinforcements couldn't coordinate response to their escape. Steven's knowledge of electronics, gained during classified operations, reduced sophisticated equipment to expensive scrap metal. Law enforcement vehicles approached from multiple directions, their flashing lights painting the industrial landscape. In emergency colors, Steven and Yen reached the facility's courtyard with their rescued charges, but uncertainty remained. Were these legitimate officers or more corrupt badges serving criminal masters? "We split up here," Steven told Yen. "You get the children to safety. I settle this with Torino personally." The final confrontation was approaching, and both men could taste it in the air like copper and gunpowder. Yen led the children through Detroit's industrial maze with movements that transformed movie acrobatics into practical survival skills. Shipping containers became cover, loading docks provided elevation, chain-link fences offered barriers against pursuit. His responsibility for 12 young lives focused his abilities with laser precision. The pursuing guards expected to corral frightened children, but encountered a martial artist who had finally found purpose beyond entertainment. Yen's Wing Chun evolved during the running battle, emphasizing protection over performance, substance over style. Each technique served the greater goal of keeping innocence alive. Tommy coordinated the younger children with leadership skills that exceeded his 16 years. His sister Katie stayed close while helping manage kids who ranged from 8 to 15, their terror transforming into determined cooperation under pressure. Meanwhile, Steven descended into the facility's hidden basement, following intelligence that indicated additional prisoners. The subterranean levels revealed the operation's true scope: dozens of holding cells, medical equipment for drugging victims, transportation schedules that treated children like freight shipments. Maria Santos and Ashley Chun occupied separate cells, their condition revealing weeks of captivity and systematic psychological abuse. Steven's students recognized their teacher despite the darkness, hope replacing despair as rescue became reality. "Sensei," Maria whispered, her voice carrying relief that made Steven's chest tight with protective fury. "We knew you'd come." Steven's fight through the basement showcased his most lethal applications: military techniques designed for elimination rather than submission. The facility's security chief proved to be a professional killer rather than simple muscle, their confrontation testing skills that Steven had hoped never to need again. The battle was personal now, fought in corridors that smelled like fear and concrete. Steven's opponent brought professional training and expensive equipment, but authenticity triumphed over purchased skill. Pressure points that induced paralysis, joint locks that caused permanent damage, techniques that belonged in wars rather than exhibitions. Steven emerged from the basement carrying Ashley Chun, while Maria and 6 other rescued children followed. The sight of FBI vehicles rather than corrupt local police filled him with relief. Betty Rodriguez had finally convinced legitimate authorities to take action. "The children are safe," Steven told her as federal agents secured the scene. But this isn't over yet. Torino waited in his command center, and 50 years of patient revenge demanded personal resolution. The facility's command center occupied the top floor of what had once been Detroit's pride, a building that processed legitimate cargo when America still made things that mattered. Now it served as headquarters for an enterprise that traded in human misery with corporate efficiency. Eddie Torino waited among monitors, showing his criminal empire's collapse in real time. News coverage, federal raids, bank accounts being frozen, associates being arrested across 5 states. 50 years of careful construction dissolving like sugar in rain. "You destroyed everything," Torino said as Steven entered, his silver hair still perfect despite the evening's catastrophe. "Just like you destroyed my brother." The story emerged like blood from old wounds. Laos, 1975, a classified rescue operation that had gone sideways when intelligence proved wrong and backup never arrived. 19 hostages captured, including CIA contractor Michael Torino, Eddie's younger brother and only family. He was 19 years old, Steven. Brilliant, brave, everything I wanted to be. Your unit was supposed to bring him home. Steven absorbed the accusation without defense, understanding finally why his military records had been accessed, his post-service life monitored, his reputation targeted for destruction. Personal vengeance disguised as criminal enterprise. I couldn't save your brother, Eddie. I'm sorry for that failure. The fight that followed belonged to a different generation, when men settled differences with their hands rather than lawyers. Torino had maintained his skills through 5 decades of planning, his techniques sharpened by hatred and refined through patient practice. But Steven's mastery represented authentic tradition versus purchased technique. Military combatives enhanced by Aikido principles, lethal applications tempered by wisdom that understood violence's true cost. Each exchange demonstrated why some legends were built on actual bodies rather than manufactured reputation. Torino used weapons and environmental advantages, fighting with the desperation of a man who had invested everything in a single moment of revenge. Steven responded with techniques that redirected force rather than meeting it directly, using his opponent's fury as fuel for his own tactical advantage. The end came not through brutality, but superior technique and mental discipline. Torino's defeat was complete but not fatal, justice tempered by mercy that his brother's memory deserved. Federal agents took Torino into custody as Steven watched from the command center's windows. I couldn't save your brother 50 years ago, but I saved these children tonight. That's what matters now. Forgiveness offered freely, even when it couldn't be earned. Dawn broke over Detroit like absolution granted after a long night's confession. The shipping facility had become a crime scene that would take federal investigators months to fully document, its secrets finally exposed to sunlight that sterilized decades of shadow. Steven sat on an ambulance tailgate, allowing paramedics to treat injuries that were more symbolic than serious. His body had absorbed punishment that would have hospitalized men half his age, but Aikido principles had distributed damage across muscle groups trained to endure rather than break. Donnie Yen approached carrying his own collection of bruises, and the expression of a man who had discovered something valuable about himself in the darkness. The rivalry that had started in Beverly Hills publicity seemed to belong to a different century, irrelevant now that they had shared genuine combat. Steven, Yen's voice carried respect that couldn't be manufactured or purchased. I owe you an apology that's bigger than words. Betty Rodriguez coordinated the media response with efficiency that would have impressed military public affairs officers. Her cameras captured the reunion of rescued children with families who had never stopped hoping, human interest stories that transformed statistics into faces that mattered. The live broadcast reached audiences across 5 states, revealing the truth about their original fight and Torino's manipulation. Yen spoke first, his formal apology carrying weight that social media couldn't diminish or distort. I called Steven Seagal a Hollywood fighter who never fought for real. I was wrong about everything. This man's martial arts mastery is authentic, his courage is genuine, and his character is beyond question. Steven's response demonstrated why legends endured while celebrities faded. Instead of claiming victory, he emphasized the rescued children, the federal agents who had acted on evidence, the community members who had supported the investigation despite personal risk. Real victory isn't defeating an opponent. It's protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Tommy emotionally thanked Steven for saving his sister and the other children, his 16-year-old voice carrying gratitude that would last a lifetime. Katie hugged Steven with the fierce affection that only children could express without embarrassment. Federal prosecutors confirmed that Torino's network had been dismantled across multiple states. Over 300 children rescued, dozens of criminals arrested. The scope of the victory was staggering, its human cost immeasurable in positive terms. As the sun climbed higher over Detroit, Steven and Yen shook hands with genuine friendship, replacing manufactured rivalry. Perhaps you could teach me some real Aikido techniques, Yen asked. Steven smiled with warmth that cameras couldn't capture. Perhaps you could show me some of your acrobatic applications. We all have something to learn. Detroit Police Headquarters buzzed with activity that belonged more to war rooms than local law enforcement facilities. Federal agents coordinated with local officers, while prosecutors prepared cases that would reshape how America fought human trafficking. The scope was unprecedented, the evidence overwhelming, the potential sentences measured in lifetimes rather than years. Steven handled the press conference with characteristic understatement, deflecting personal praise toward the children's welfare and the federal agents who had acted on evidence rather than jurisdictional politics. His responses demonstrated why authentic heroes avoided spotlights that attracted insects. This was never about martial arts or personal reputation. He told reporters who still wanted to focus on celebrity combat. 200 children were rescued because good people refused to ignore evil when they encountered it. Yen supported Steven's statements with the fervor of a convert who had discovered religion through proximity to genuine faith. His public acknowledgement of Steven's superior knowledge and character reached audiences who measured respect in box office receipts rather than authentic accomplishment. The press conference revealed the trafficking operation's full scope. A criminal network that had operated across 5 states, using entertainment venues as hunting grounds and shipping American children to buyers in 6 countries. The profit margins were obscene, the human cost incalculable, the systematic nature terrifying in its efficiency. Major news outlets transformed Steven from washed-up actor to real-life hero with the same casual precision they had used to destroy his reputation days earlier. Social media exploded with clips of his authentic martial arts skills, viral videos that demonstrated why some legends were built on substance rather than publicity. Betty Rodriguez received credit for investigative reporting that had exposed the network, her journalism serving justice rather than entertainment. The Pulitzer Prize Committee would recognize her work months later, but the rescued children provided more meaningful validation than any award ceremony. Federal authorities announced charges against corrupt law enforcement officers across multiple jurisdictions, revealing how deeply the criminal network had penetrated institutions designed to protect the innocent. The systemic nature of the corruption shocked even experienced investigators. Yen announced that Steven's original appearance fee, which Torino had never intended to pay, would be donated to expand youth programs across Detroit and 3 other cities. The gesture was substantial, meaningful, and completely without publicity value. The press conference ended with Steven characteristically avoiding continued media attention, walking away from cameras toward his neighborhood and the real work that waited there. "The real work starts now," he told those who followed him, referring to helping rescued children recover from trauma that would take years to heal. 1 week later, the community center hummed with renewed energy that felt like prayers answered. In concrete and hope, Steven's dojo had been cleaned, repaired, and expanded with equipment donated by supporters from across the country who understood that authentic heroes deserved authentic support. The evening class assembled on mats that had absorbed decades of sweat and dreams, now witnessing something approaching resurrection. Steven's original students sat alongside several of the rescued children, their shared trauma creating bonds that transcended age and background differences. Tommy had matured in ways that couldn't be measured in calendar pages, his 16-year-old confidence tempered by experiences that belonged in adult nightmares. He helped teach younger students with newfound wisdom, demonstrating techniques while explaining principles that Steven had drilled into him through months of patient instruction. "Remember what Sensei taught us," Tommy told 8-year-old Marcus Williams, guiding the boy through basic wrist escapes. "We don't fight to win. We fight to resolve conflict." Maria Santos and Ashley Chun participated in class with therapeutic determination, their recovery aided by structured activity and the safety that Steven's presence represented. Dr. Williams observed from the sidelines, documenting the positive effects of martial arts training on traumatized children. Donnie Yen had become a regular fixture, arriving twice weekly from his temporary Detroit residence to study authentic Aikido under Steven's guidance. His transformation from arrogant celebrity to humble student provided ongoing lessons about character development that spoke louder than any formal curriculum. Steven used recent events as teaching examples, demonstrating how true strength emerged from protecting others rather than seeking personal glory. His lessons incorporated meditation techniques for managing fear and anxiety, breathing exercises that provided tools for emotional regulation. The greatest victory, Steven told his expanded class, is not defeating an enemy, but turning an enemy into a friend. The lesson concluded with students practicing forms that emphasized harmony over conflict, redirection over resistance. Yen worked alongside children who had survived experiences beyond his previous comprehension, his movie star status irrelevant in a space devoted to authentic growth. After class, Steven sat with Tommy, Maria, and Ashley, listening to their plans for futures that trauma hadn't destroyed. Tommy wanted to study social work. Maria was interested in law enforcement. Ashley planned to become a martial arts instructor. "You've learned that strength comes from service to others," Steven told them. "You will do great things." 6 months later, the Steven Seagal Youth Development Center occupied 3 buildings in downtown Detroit. Its expansion funded by donations from supporters who understood that authentic heroism deserved lasting investment. The sign outside bore Steven's name despite his repeated attempts to have it removed. Some battles even legends couldn't win. The program now served 200 children daily across multiple locations in Detroit, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cleveland. What had begun as one man's quiet mission to help at-risk youth had evolved into a movement that demonstrated how individual actions could create systemic change. Steven moved through the main facility's morning routine with satisfaction that couldn't be purchased or manufactured. Children from diverse backgrounds practiced together on mats that had become sacred ground, spaces where poverty and privilege dissolved into shared commitment to something larger than individual circumstances. Donnie Yen had become Steven's official co-instructor, his transformation from arrogant celebrity to humble teacher providing ongoing proof that people could change when properly motivated. Their friendship demonstrated that former enemies could become trusted allies when united by common purpose. Betty Rodriguez's Pulitzer Prize hung in her office alongside photographs of rescued children whose futures had been salvaged from darkness. Her investigative reporting had revealed that authentic journalism could serve justice rather than merely entertainment, truth rather than profit. Marcus managed the expanded facilities while Steven continued teaching, their 40-year friendship. Having survived Hollywood, heartbreak, and the kind of real-world heroism that movies could never adequately capture, federal authorities reported that Steven's evidence had led to over 50 convictions and the rescue of more than 300 children nationwide. The criminal network had been dismantled, its profits redistributed as victim compensation, its leaders facing sentences measured in lifetimes rather than years. As evenings settled over Detroit, Steven locked up the center and walked through his neighborhood, noting changes that couldn't be quantified in statistics. Children played safely on streets where fear had previously ruled. Families gathered on porches that had once been abandoned to despair. He paused at a small memorial garden, planted for trafficking victims who hadn't survived their captivity, including those his military unit had failed to save 50 years earlier. Yen joined him there, and they stood in respectful silence that honored the dead while celebrating the living. "Do you think we made a difference?" Yen asked quietly. Steven placed a gentle hand on his friend's shoulder, his voice carrying the weight of authentic satisfaction. "We saved lives, taught respect, and showed that true strength comes from protecting others. That's enough for any lifetime." As they walked away together, the center's lights glowed warmly behind them, children's laughter echoing from inside, the sound of hope restored and futures reclaimed from darkness. If you liked the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.